Hello. Oh boy, 2 people are here. It's nice to see you. Please say hello in the chat. I didn't have my earrings on, and I don't feel complete without my earrings for these truths, for these lives. Um, let's see. This is a new month, Dr. Rosie Kuhn, and we're talking today about deep recovery. This whole month, we're talking about recovery, as in substance abuse, behavior abuse, thought abuse, the way that we use patterns of choice, we'll say, in service to avoiding a sense of um, out of controlness, I would say. So I'm going to start over again because I'm really nervous and I came in when you guys weren't here. Um, Welcome. Happy New Year to you. It's January 6th. And this month we're talking about addictions and not just substances. In fact, I mean, we're talking about addictions, but we're really talking about deep recovery. And when we think of recovery, we think of we're recovering ourselves from some substance abuse, or we think of ourselves as recovering from, diseases and those kinds of stuff. Hi, Fred. Um, so I want to talk about this recovering process this whole month, and today specifically, like, what are we recovering from, or what are we recovering, and who are we recovering, and what are we recovering from? So that's what we're talking about today. Um, I want to mention that if you haven't already, you might find that the boot camp that I created on YouTube, it's called Inward Bound Boot Camp for Self-Transformation, could be really helpful for those of you who are looking to recover yourself from whatever it is that you're in. In fact, I think transformation itself is the process of recovering ourselves from all of the things that we've taken on, all the habits and addictions and things that we do that we think is just normal, but we've actually cultivated the practice or the patterns. And if we've cultivated the practices and patterns, we can actually choose to do it differently. We can choose to let go of those habits and patterns. So the boot camp to self-transformation, the link is below. So please check that out. And if you want to, and also there's another link to my website where you can sign up for a PDF that gives you sort of the downloads every day for the videos, which is each video is about 10 minutes long, and it's all free. So it's a great program that will support you and empower you to through a process of learning, at least in a boot camp, how the process of self-transformation. So my background, how could I talk about recovery? So a long time ago, I studied and graduated with a degree in marriage and family therapy and ended up in Nova Scotia working for what used to be called the Commission on Drug Dependency, the Commission on Drug Dependency. And I was a clinical therapist there working with people who were in the process of recovering from substances, drugs. We just froze. From drugs, alcohol, codependency, and substance abuse like food, so eating disorders. So I was a therapist that worked with people who were in the process of recovering. Now, when I was working in the field specifically in terms of substance abuse, it didn't occur to me that there were other levels of abuse or addictions. But through that 8 years that I worked in recovery, I learned an awful lot. One of the things I learned, and this was emphasized in the movie What the Bleep. If you've ever not seen that yet, you might want to look at it. Some of the information is not current, but in terms of addictions, it was so great because what they said was in that movie specifically, but is true, is what we're doing when we're taking a substance, food, or drink or drugs, in essence, is we're shifting our hormonal situation from something that feels uncomfortable. We feel irritable, we feel restless, we feel uncomfortable, And when we do what we do, it brings us to a sense of balance. Um, and how I explain this is as we were growing up in whatever family situation we were in, there was anxiety. So part of growing up in any family is that there's an anxiousness that occurs just because we're human beings, because we exist and we don't know everything and things can be uncomfortable. So over time, we learn patterns of being, we train ourselves in patterns of being to either calm ourselves or get attention in a sense. And so some people, when they don't get attention, they might yell and get angry. That's their way when they get powerless. They feel powerless as children, get angry and throw tantrums. Other children might cry and get sad. Other children might withdraw. And so these are patterns of behavior that we begin to take on and actually begin and continue to use them over and over and over again. One of my clients, we were talking about how she's being in her work situation, and some of her patterns of being is to basically just say, "Not gonna do it. I don't wanna do it. I'm gonna leave." And it was a pattern that she realized when I asked her the question, "Where'd that come from?" She was able to describe, "Here's what happened, and here's the pattern in my life where I felt like I didn't matter. Nobody was paying attention to me." And so basically, I gave him the finger and said, "Not in it. I'm out." And that was a pattern that she's continued for 35 more years. And so these patterns are with us, but they become so ingrained, we don't even know we're doing them until they get in the way of either our work or relationships with people, a relationship with money or health. And then we go, wait, maybe I can do something about that. So these patterns we've developed over time, usually when we were really young, and they're things that we continued over time. Now, the use of substances or the use of eating specifically, that's also something that's a lot of times developed in our family to calm ourselves or to mask the symptoms of anxiousness. And anxiousness is just a sensation in our body where we feel restless or irritable, discontent, maybe some sadness, sad, bad, mad is basically what we feel, and we're taught in our society you're not supposed to feel that way, and we don't like the feeling this discomfort, and when we don't know what to do to calm ourselves or soothe ourselves, then we go to drink, drugs, food as just the first layer of stuff. We'll talk about other things too, but that's what we do is we start to develop patterns. Some people bite their nails, or I'm a wiggler. I wiggle all the time because that's calms me, and it's a way for my body to let go of excess energy. And when I was in high school, my boyfriend said, "You got to stop doing that moving thing." I stopped doing that moving thing. I got very depressed and suicidal. I mean, to imagine that my body wiggling had kept all of that emotions and the sadness and the hurt and the despair off and away that, when I stopped doing it, I felt that level of despair that I was suicidal. And the part of the challenge for so many people who have addictions, and we'll talk about the other kinds of addictions, but they don't have an outlet or an ability to communicate. Not that don't have an ability to communicate, but perhaps the environment that they're brought up in. For me, I was not brought up in an environment where I could tell my parents how I felt. I wasn't in most dysfunctional families. We're not allowed to know our thoughts, feelings, our needs, or our wants. So instead of being able to say, "Hey, I'm feeling sad or mad or bad," I wasn't allowed to know that. And so I would do other things, which became very good at, to mask my own feelings and take care of other people. That was a pattern that I developed. I know these things keep slowing down, so I apologize. So that's the beginning, if you will, of this process of how we lose ourselves is that we have a feeling or a sensation, even as children, and we're not allowed to think or know what we're feeling. And now hi, Marge. Quite often I'll hear young mothers say to their children, use your words. And that's a very cool thing because they're teaching their children that they have their empowered beings that have their own feelings and needs and wants, as opposed to, hitting. So hitting is is a pattern where we're abusing or hitting somebody else with our words or with our, physically. So these are all patterns that we create and develop over time. So I've started talking about substances, food, drink, and drugs. But then there's the patterns that are, and again, we start using these things partly because, let's say you're having fun gambling. You go to a casino and you gamble and you win $5 and you go, woohoo. And there's this drug, this high, and you go, ooh, I want more of that. And so you do it again and you do it again and you do it again. And you get engaged and connected in a way that feels good. The adrenaline, the hormonal thing that I talked about a minute ago, it kicks in and you go, "Ooh, I want more of that." So that's where gambling comes in. That's where gaming comes in. That's where and things like pornography. So we're getting into behaviors as opposed to substance abuse. So behaviors. So pornography, sex, retail therapy, as we call it. But people can be addicted to shopping. I don't know if you do that, but I at times use that to calm myself. I'm going to buy something because I want to feel better about myself, or I want to feel better about the situation. Um, so so there's also relationships, and we'll get into that. But we use sex quite often as a form of as it becomes an addiction where people need sex to calm themselves down. And the same with love. I was more, if anything, I didn't have a substance abuse addiction. I was a love addict, if you will, and I was basically and definitely a codependent person, but I had an addiction to love as in next boyfriend, next boyfriend, next boyfriend, that whole kind of process. So there's those kinds of addictions and habits that we get into. And I mentioned habits like biting your fingernails or pulling on your hair, or pulling on scabs and pulling on your skin, masturbation, um, all kinds of things that are habits and patterns that we do that we don't even realize is what we're doing. Like I said, until it gets to a point where you go, I got to stop doing that. I didn't even mention cigarette smoking or any other kinds of smoking. That also is habitual habits. Um, and then there's the emotional, mental addictions that we have to anxiousness. Like and I mentioned that we start out because there's a pattern of normalness at our home, and then we start to develop that patterness of what we learned at home, and we take that into the world. So if I grew up with a certain level com- of um, of angst and anxiousness and dread, that's normal for me. And so whatever hormones that is, then I kind of keep that in place and I go to other places, always trying to, not, I mean, all, like different relationships or going to school or going to work, but that's my normal. And so each of us has a normal that we hold on to and that we think is normal, but it's normal because it's my normal, but it's probably not your normal because you lived in a different family. Even my sisters and brothers, I have 8 sisters and brothers, we all have a different normal because we all each had a different experience in that family, and our dynamics of how we dealt with the dysfunctions and the alcoholism and stuff was every different. So every single one of us has a different way of dealing with life. And so we each develop our own patterns of being. So emotionally, people can get angry. It could be, get triggered, you go to anger. People get triggered and they go to judging. Somebody, you see something and you judge. In a sense, you always have to be right. You always have your own opinion about what's right and what's wrong. Um, and, uh, and also about, I'm sorry that they keep we keep slowing down here. So I hope you'll stay with me. Um, Self-deprecation. So people might say something positive to you, but you're always seeing it as you always slight yourself. You always say something that's self-deprecating about yourself, or to yourself. So that self-deprecation becomes quite, as all of these are, become damaging over time. Um, Being in a state of self-hate and always hating yourself because you're not something that you think you should be. Those are just the patterns that we develop and cultivate. And again, we don't think of them, and that's part of why I'm doing these lives, is just like, "Oh, yeah, I never thought that that was something that I did that would be a contribution to my life sucking or not being as wonderful as I'd like it to be." And that's the point of these, is just to cultivate awareness, and if it's interesting, you can go, "Yeah, that makes sense," and I can get some support around that or not. Um, so So there's the emotional, where we go as a pattern. Like, again, I would go to victim, poor me, you'll never guess what happened to me. That was my pattern of truth. You'll never guess what my mother said this time. You'll never guess what my boyfriend did that time. That was my whole pattern. It was like, oh my God, it was pretty exhausting for anybody who had to be around me. Um, Pride is being prideful is a pattern or a habit that we don't even know exists, but is there. So quite often, and I have a number of clients that have been in the recovery process or in the 12-step programs, and one of the issues, what a lot of meetings do is for new people in the program, help out with serving coffee or setting up the tables. This is, when people can be in a room together, setting up, cleaning up, making coffee. And quite often, people who are starting the program go, "What do you mean? You want me to do that?" It's like, "I'm too good for this. You can't expect me to want to do that. That's beneath me." And that sense of beneathness, which can be a pattern that gets in the way of truly being authentically available to people. And as any one of these things that I've mentioned, any one of these patterns and habits, it gets in the way of us being authentically ourselves and true to ourselves and true to the person that we're talking to. So very rarely do any of us have authentic conversations with people, because we're always in one of our patterns. Oh, I want that person to like me, so I'm going to show up this way. I want that person, I don't like that person, so I'm going to show up this way. We're always manipulating and maneuvering based on our patterns and our habits and our addictions to thoughts and feelings and sensations. And when we can be aware of that, we can go, wait, I'm not being myself. How can I be myself if I'm always trying to keep stable and stay out of restless, irritable discontent? So, so that's what we're up to. Other patterns of being that are in a sense addictions is worry and guilt. I know for myself, it's like anytime, like for instance, with food, anytime I would eat something, I would question, "Ooh, well, I'm going to feel guilty if I eat this, and I'll eat it anyway." But the sense of where, if I am not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, guilt was the automatic go-to. And then I would be in shame and self-hate. So it was a whole combination, a combo plate of self-hate, guilt, worry that people aren't gonna, they're gonna find out or decide about me because I'm doing what I said I wouldn't do. So guilt is a big pattern. Worry is a big pattern. We sometimes aren't even aware of ourselves or think in terms of worry. And again, the the sometimes the internet's a little wacky, so I'm sorry about that. Uh, I'm gonna pause here. Okay. So, we don't even think these patterns are relevant to our well-being. and it's our well-being that we're recovering. It's our authentic self that we're recovering, and most of us don't even have a sense or reality that exists, that there's that's a their you, authentic you, to be uncovered, and to be realized and to be expressed as your authentic self. We don't have a clue of that, especially when we're growing up. And for me, in such a large family, I was sort of an enmeshed part of this domesticated farm proper, this group of people. And and I didn't know that I had an individual self that was worthy of knowing, and I just became did what was another addiction, which is I became a codependent. It's like my focus was on what other people need and want, what other people think, what other people feel, what other people, my whole focus was on other people. And that's a very important component if you're living with alcoholics, is how to negotiate and maneuver when living with with alcoholics. I had two alcoholics, my parents, um, and so that process was part of that as well. So codependency is who I am in relation to other people, and that is beyond my love addiction and the sex addiction. I didn't have a addiction, but I used sex as part of that love addiction, which is what I did. Don't know what you do. Um, so so those are all patterns, patterns of getting sick when there's stress, or when this happens a lot when people are something positive is about to happen for people, they get sick or they have an accident. Something happens, and it's a dynamic, and it's like, how can that be? How could that be an addiction? But it's a pattern that is occurring within us that we don't realize we have control over. We don't realize that that's something that we're creating on some level. And so when we become more conscious of all of this, or any of this, we become more empowered to make choices, to shift those things. So getting diseased, falling down, accidents, victimizing. You'll never guess what happened this time. I've already mentioned that. I was kind of really into that pattern of always being a victim. And one of my rationalizations was, if I wasn't a victim and I didn't talk about what was happening to me, the terrible, horrible things, I wouldn't have anything to talk about. And then I realized, well, that's really stupid, because I'm a therapist and I'm kind of a competent person. I have a master's degree. But my mind, our mentalizations, those habits and patterns of how we see ourselves and perceive ourselves, is so deeply ingrained that we don't even have a consciousness yet to say that doesn't make sense. The other night I was thinking about, had watched some television, and I've been, I just kind of made me cry, that kind of stuff. And I had a thought about being a failure. And here I'm almost 70 years old, very competent, accomplished person. And there's this trigger of you're failing. And I went, wait, let's get rid of that one, because it does not make any sense at all to keep that pattern around. But those are patterns of going, oh, you're failing, you're going to fail, you're going to fail. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people who go, I'm going to fail. It's like, where's the evidence for that? So I was able to get to a point of my consciousness to go, wait, that doesn't make sense anymore. We don't have to play into that, or victiming, or martyring, or some of the others, worry, guilt. Like, let's just kind of take those patterns off the plate, because we don't need to use those things anymore. And that's what we're talking about here. I've got probably a few more addiction-y things and habits that we're using. And if you have some of your own that I haven't mentioned, please leave them in the chat or down below in the comments, so that can be part of this conversation, because I don't want to miss some of that. I would say some of the racism issues are that addictive pattern of seeing the world and the unwillingness to do it differently. And that's part of our resistance to change. The video here, but we don't want to give up our ways, because they bring comfort, and we feel empowered when we are using our addiction of choice. Workaholics is another pattern of we feel empowered when we work because we get validation and we get a sense of accomplishment. We make a lot of money and we sometimes have prestige or whatever around that. It's like, give me more of that, give me more of that. But it's a false sense of self. And that's what we're looking for. When I'm in relationship, I have a sense of myself, but it's not, it's a false sense of myself. And we do this all the time. When we're daydreaming or when we're worrying, it's the same thing. We're in a false sense of self. We're out in the future. Look at ourselves in the past, which is another pattern of being. I'm always thinking about the past, always thinking about my family, or always thinking about the past. I'm in a false sense of self. I'm not in myself. So, what this month is about, this deep recovery, is how do we even get to know that there's this self beyond all these habits and using and patterns? How do we know even where to begin with that? And that can suck. That can suck. Anybody who has had a substance abuse challenge to start with, or even a pattern of using, for instance, gambling. I remember related to drug use, this fellow that was just really so appreciated what he said, but it was true for apparently all addicts, is they have that original high that is just so phenomenal that every single time they use, they're attempting to get that. However many years they're using, that's what they're trying to get to. And it's like, wow. And I think that's true with any substance or with any behavior. We're trying to get that sense of self through whatever portal, um, whatever use or behavior we're doing. We're trying to get that sense of something that is intangible for many of us. I mean, you can get drunk over and over and over again, but there was probably an original something that was like, oh my God, I felt so great once I had that. And I know that'll help. So I'm going to do that again. And it does, but it keeps us from actually, it keeps us in a state of management, but doesn't contribute to, okay, I got to actually deal with my issues, so that I can actually have well-being in my life and balance and contentment. In each person, it's like there's a point where, and this is where for me as a coach, it's really important to ask the question. People can have, people who have addictions, people who have substance abuse or workaholic or retailing, hoarding, anything. People with these kinds of patterns, and you go, they need help. But what's important is to know that these ways of being are empowering to them. And it was really empowering to me, when, in a sense, in the love addiction, when I would get the attraction with a man, and that attraction happened, bazingo, it was like, oh my God, the sparks, this, and it just brought me into this whole reality. Falling in love is a drug, this hormonal thing that happens, and we love falling in love. And so that was my sort of drug of choice, is falling in loveness. So we know people with all kinds of patterns, and there's a sense of empowerment that happens, and that we want. And if somebody takes that away from us and takes that away from me, now I feel disempowered. Like, now what am I going to do to get a sense of high, or get a sense of self, or get a sense of something? What do I have if you take that away from me? And so it's a deep exploration. This fellow I worked with, and I may have mentioned him before. This was in the 70s. This is in the late 70s, early 80s. And I was working with a high school student. He was A+ student, football captain, great guy. And he was an addict and an alcoholic in high school. And he ended up in the insane ward for the dangerous people, and in Halifax. And I went to see him, and I said, look, you're gonna kill yourself here. He was trying to stab himself with a butter knife at a restaurant. um, because the cops were coming, and so they took him to this place in Halifax, and so I went to and I said, "You're gonna kill yourself," and he got like shocked, and somehow those words in my mind, that's what happened, shifted, and he got sober. He went through a 28-day program, and then he stayed in Halifax as opposed to going back to this little hometown. And from then on, he became more and more engaged and involved with his own recovery. So every once in a while, I'd get a call from him and he'd go, "Rosie, I'm not addicted to drugs. I'm not addicted to alcohol. I'm actually a sex addict." And I go, "Okay, great. Good to know. Great." So he worked on that. And then he called me a couple months later and say, "You know what I found out? I'm addicted to anger." It's like, good to know. And so it was just a wonderful unfolding of what was happening to this individual as he was exploring and getting to know himself. And that was 30, 40 years ago. So he's every once in a while we connect still, and he's having a great life. So what are we recovering when we're talking about here's all the things that we do, habits and addictions, um, and when we stop doing those things, what shows up? And what's underlying all of those things? So as I mentioned, we use habits, behaviors, emotional things. We use all of this stuff to avoid and ignore the true experience that we're having, perhaps of sad, whatever we feel sad about or powerless about or um, confused about, and we're not able to talk about it, but we don't have any way of dealing with it. We turn to a substance or a habit. Again, some people chew their nails or pull their hair, or it can be the slightest, what appears to be a slightest thing, but it's an indication of I'm not comfortable right now. And you may talk to people, and as you're talking to them about something, they might start, fidgeting or looking at their watch, and it's like they're uncomfortable. And we can just say, "Hey, are you uncomfortable about something?" Because those are patterns that are habit coming up. So when we're restless, irritable, discontent, what we're wanting to do is to avoid, ignore, um, distract ourselves from the discomfort because we don't know how to be in the discomfort. And I think one of the things that the pandemic is allowing us is opportunities and so many resources to say, hey, there's so much uncertainty here. And you can go to your natural go-tos of substances or food or whatever, where you can actually get help. Because a lot of people are talking about what it's like to live in the uncertainty and what it's like living with the depression of the isolation, and all of those people are talking about it. And so it gives us an opportunity to go, yeah, I'm feeling the same way. It gives us an opportunity to talk about it. And when we're talking about it, we're expressing, we're empowered now to say what's true. We're empowering ourselves, and the world is empowering us. And I'm empowering you, in a sense, to empower yourself, to have a different conversation for yourself. So that's what we're recovering, is our ability to articulate what's true for ourselves, even if it's I feel bad, mad, sad, or glad. That might be a friend of mine. He said when he started on his journey and he was 20 something, he had no emotional intelligence whatsoever. It was those four things. He went to therapy. He said that was as capable as he was to articulate, I feel mad, I feel bad, sad, or glad. So many of us are starting out in that way and going, I don't even know what I feel. And sometimes, I've done a lot of work on myself, but sometimes I don't know what that feeling is. And it doesn't matter what the feeling is. What matters is I'm attending to it versus covering it up, masking it, avoiding it. So so that's the first part of it. Is like I for you or for any of us to make an empowered choice of I want to have a life that is fulfilling. This is not fulfilling. And if you know that and you want a life that is fulfilling, Now you're going to take the steps to make changes potentially. But that comes from an empowered sense of choice rather than I should stop doing that. I should stop eating. I should stop pornography. I should stop. Yeah, it's like, yeah, we all should stop those things, but it's not enough. What's enough is when something becomes important enough to you that you willingly choose to choose something else. So my job as a transformational coach is to support and empower people to support and empower themselves to be accountable for that's what I want. One of the biggest moments in my life was when I was in my 30s and I'd been working in addictions. And this guy, you may have heard me tell this story, Big Don was his name. He had a grade 3 education, worked in the pulp mill, and had been alcoholic, but he was sober for 10 or 15 years. And Big Don would come into the office and sit and have coffee. That's what we did in Nova Scotia, or, just people came and had coffee and sat with the secretary and the counselor and just hung out and had coffee. It was a place that people could get connection. Well, Big Don was this wonderful man. And I realized that Big Don had serenity. Big Don had a sense of a contentment and truth in his heart. He was a very authentic, connected person with himself through through his sobriety and his recovery. And here I had a master's degree and I had, whatever, and I was a therapist and blah, blah, blah. It meant nothing to me in that moment because he had what I wanted. He had the sobriety. He had serenity. And it was the first time in my life that I had no idea that I was an addict, if you will, that I had my own need for recovery. And because I said, oh, no, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a this, I'm not a that. But I was an addict in many, many ways. And in knowing that, then that was the beginning of my recovery process. And looking at my love addictions and my codependency addiction and other stuff. So there's that point where you go, that's sobriety. That's not the sobriety, but the serenity that comes through sobriety. That was what was important to me. So then I could start to put distance between me and the next relationship. I could put distance between me and other habits and patterns so that I got sober, really got sober in many ways. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, it's like you might be a nail biter, or people who smoke, it's like there's the pattern of the physical patterns or whatever. When you stop doing that, it's you're getting sober. You're doing something other than what your pattern is. I'm left-handed. If something happened to my left hand, I'd have to start using my right hand. I'd have to, in a sense, withdraw from patterns and start something else. It was important enough to me that the serenity was what I wanted. And that became, in a sense, my driving force for the next 40 years. So that's really what's important here is what is it you want and what patterns are you engaged in? And you might not even know that. Patterns keep coming up for me all the time that I never even realized are in my life that that keep me from really being in a state of serenity and contentment in my life and being more playful or being my more authentic self. If you haven't, you may have heard me say this before, but part of my doing these lives is to cultivate awareness of stuff and how we be in the world. But part of it is to practice being my authentic self rather than, ooh, who do you need me to be? Who do you want me to be? How do I get you to, coach with me and make money, or all of those things that are irrelevant to just me being me with you. And so that's my practice is I'm being me with you. It's a practice because vulnerable comes up and all kinds of things. And sometimes, like I said, the video's not working so well or whatever. And I have to be with that as myself without being, doing my patterning that isn't me. Hello, Sigrid. Nice to see you. Sigrid says, as an addict, where can I go to attend a 12-step program if I'm not an alcoholic or drug user? Can I go to an AA meeting if I'm not an alcoholic, but am definite addict as you describe? Sigrid, we can talk about that, by phone or whatever, because I think you're still here, and there may not be specific. There are Al-Anon meetings. There are codependency meetings, I believe. So we can talk about that. But I don't know specifically any other 12-step programs, at least where we live, that might be of value to you. You can, and as you get clear about what those addictions are, you could go online and just Google it and see what shows up. Because there are so many online meetings now that might be what you need, what might work for you. So let me know if that works. You know where to find me if you want to talk about that, just quickly, and I can give you. But if you Google those kinds of patterns, you might find some support online, and or therapists or social workers or support on the island. If that could be beneficial to you. So thanks for bringing that up. Thank you. So I want to talk about, this is one thing, but I want to talk about it, which is when people go into recovery and they get sober, that means they're stop using their patterns or their drugs of choice. And getting sober is the first step of this whole recovery process. And as you get one of the things I wanted to mention too is quite often when I was working in addictions and people would say, well, I want to know, before I give up my alcohol, I want to know why I'm drinking. And it's like, yeah, I don't know why you're drinking. But the bottom line is you won't know why you're drinking until you stop drinking. Or if you use pornography, or if you hoard, whatever it is that is your pattern, until you stop using that particular pattern, you won't know the underlying source of that. In a sense, quite often there's as I talk about the restless, irritable discontent and what we do to calm that, it's like, well, what's the source or the original source of that restless, irritable discontent? You feel irritable and discontent. What's the source of that? And people go, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, what is it that's causing the restless, irritable discontent? And it could be, I'm worried about money. It could be, when people are arguing, it upsets me. It could be, I'm not as pretty as I want to be. It could be anything. But the thought that creates that restless, irritable discontent says, I'm not okay. I'm not okay in a sense I might not be safe. I feel unsafe, or I feel uncared for, I feel unlovable. That's, in a sense, the underlying source of our restless, irritable discontent. So we want to begin to reveal, here's the restless, irritable discontent. Here's what I do to manage that restless, irritable discontent. Now we take away what we did. We get sober, and it's like, ooh, now I start to feel uncomfortable. That restless, irritable discontent comes up, and the emotions, the feelings of sadness or upset, or the thoughts that nobody loves me, or I'm unsafe, or nobody's here to take care of me, or whatever that is that starts to come up, we got to be with that. And that's really scary. And so in the beginning, when we start to get sober and using fellowship programs and or therapists or coaches or support people, whoever that is, support groups, we start to manage our lives without our substance, without our patterns, without our habits. People who are debtors, people who get into debt as an addiction, as a patterning, right? It's a patterning. How do you stop doing that, right? And you start managing your life without the crutches, without those habits, without those patterns, to see what shows up. And that's really, really important to get to a place of managing life without those patterns. But then there's the what I'm all about in deep recovery and in transformational coaching is that we can get to a point where we don't have to be in management anymore, but we can get beyond management to we're in a sense in a state of recovery, a greater state of recovery, a deeper sense of recovery of ourselves, where thoughts of substances or thoughts of sex or thoughts of debting, it just isn't there anymore. We don't have to manage anything. We can be free of those patterns. And that's where, for me, the work of transformational coaching and the paradigm shift and this place of letting go of the patterning and the support of that pattern and the underlying issues that keep us in that pattern, we can start working with that. You can start working with that. And, this is what the self-transformation is about. And the boot camp, as I mentioned earlier, there's a boot camp, Inward Bound boot camp to self-transformation. And that's a 20 video program where it supports you in looking at and asking questions of yourself and doing things with yourself that support and empower yourself to be more self-empowered and to be able to be with yourself and explore who you are beyond these patterns, beyond the use of substances, beyond the use of our dependency, what we're dependent on, okay? Dependent on to make us feel better. A lot of people, when they get anxious, I was at a restaurant the other day and there's three men sitting at a table. They're all in their FaceTime. It's like they're not engaged, and the level of concern or the level of not concern but anxiousness or discomfort perhaps of talking is too great. And so we hide in our FaceTime, we hide Facebooks, we hide in our social media stuff. It's pretty invulnerable being in your phone. And that's, another place where people go as an addictive pattern is into our phones or our social medias and things like that. So, when we're in our deep recovery, I want to just kind of say, well, in the title, what are we recovering? We're recovering our essential nature. We're recovering our capacities to be our fullest expression naturally. We're recovering our ability to be who we are without fear, without the discomfort, just the authentic presence, the authentic expression, with no fear of our safety, and that safety being somebody's going to reject us or we're going to feel unlovable or humiliated. Like none of that. We're beyond that, and that's what we're in the process of recovering, is that full sense of ourselves. I talk about it in terms of the fulfillment of our human spirit, and I think every single one of us wants that. I have no doubt that every single one of us wants that. We're not necessarily capable of knowing how to do that. Boop, like Sigrid is saying. This is Gracie. She always comes and says hello, right? So we're recovering our truth. We're recovering our dignity. The dignity is that capacity to know ourselves and trust ourselves and respect ourselves above all else. We're recovering the capacity to know ourselves and respect ourselves to the point that we do not defer ourselves to anybody for any reason. It's like, that's your way. That's your truth. That's not mine. And I'm going to stick with mine. And I don't know why. I just know that's true. And that's what's mine. I dated a guy who had gone to Stanford University, and he had actually gotten his law degree from Stanford University. And we were in the same school together getting a PhD in transpersonal psychology. And I'm pretty intuitive, and I would have a sense of knowing. And he is a very book guy, and everything was by the book. And he'd say, you can't know that because you're just saying you know it. And you can't just know it. You have evidence of it from, research or whatever. It's like, yeah, well, no, I just know this. And this, I'm sticking with it. So our ability and our willingness to stay in that place of knowing coming back to that more and more authentically. We become a gift to ourselves, and we become, when I look at who I have been most of my life and go, wow, who would want to live with that? I didn't want to live with that. That's why I kept pretending I was not that, but I was that. And the more that I keep doing this work, I come to a place of really honoring and respecting all that it's taken to get me here to this level of recovery. And there's always more to do because we're eternal beings. And as eternal, that sounds like, oh my God, I have to do this for eternity. It's like, yeah, but it kind of gets better, I think. It gets better. And a little bit easier in a sense that we realize and understand the process of this, hence the boot camp, which is really a clear definition of this process of how do we take ourselves through this recovery process. And even though it's considered self-transformation, that's recovering ourselves. We're recovering a sense of trust. We're recovering a sense of I'm safe with myself. I can trust myself. And I can't tell you the number of years that I have spent worried and fearful that I can't do for myself what I've been doing for almost 70 years for myself. Like that insanity is so ingrained in our cells that it takes a long time to get clearer and clearer. It's one of the reasons I'm glad I'm still on the planet is I actually have, especially in the last probably 5 years, become even more conscious of who I am. And I've gotten to experience the truth of this being and really appreciate all that I've been through in this lifetime to get here. I have no idea where I'm going. I have no idea what's next in that unfolding, but I'm in this process where I respect and honor and trust that I'm safe. And that's a long time coming. So when we can recover ourselves and reclaim ourselves and realize who we are underneath all of our patternings and addictions and all of those things, habits, we're a gift to ourselves and to the world. And that's what I want for you is to have a sense of that and a knowing of that. And there's so many programs and processes and books and videos and programs that are available and fellowships to support and empower every single one of us for our own unique needs and desires in terms of getting support. And that's what I want for you is to get to a point where this is important enough that you and your serenity, if you will, the contentment with yourself is more important than anything else. Is it always more important than anything else? For me, no, sometimes it's not. Sometimes, whatever, hot dog is, or, pizza or whatever, that's my big deal. That's more important in the moment. But I come back to this place of this is where I want to be, is in serenity and peace. And that's what I want for you is to respect yourself and trust and honor yourself enough that that's what you want to do for you without anybody telling you how you should do it or that you should. We froze. Okay, we froze. Without anybody telling you how to do it, but that you have the right to listen to your own empowered self for that. That's what I have to say about that. Any other questions or thoughts? If you haven't already liked, or if you found this video valuable, please give it a like. If you find that it might be valuable for other people to listen to, please share it with other people. Next week, I'm going to talk in more detail about the next week. It's called Deep Recovery. We are all recovering from something. So this week was about what are we recovering? And it's like we're recovering our dignity, our trust, our respect, self-love, appreciation, our expression of ourselves. Next week, we'll talk more about all of the things that we're recovering from. We're all recovering from something. And so we'll talk about that next week. So again, please share this with others if you find it valuable. And down below, you'll find connections to books, blogs, the boot camp, and whatever else that could be supportive for you. All right. Thanks, you guys, for being here. And I'll see you next week. Bye for now.